Welcome to Something to Talk About from the Bainbridge Island Senior and Community Center. We're going to look at some pictures from the Grand Forest. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can see that it, or Zoom, you can see it's already up there. But we're going to look at some detailed pictures in just a minute with Paul Bryans. First, I want to thank Fieldstone Communities of Bainbridge Island for being a sponsor of Something to Talk About. Fieldstone offers independent living and assisted living, as well as memory care up on Rolling Bay. And they'd love to give you a tour of their facility. They'd even treat you to lunch or dinner. Call 206-594-1010 or check out their website at fieldstonecommunities.com. Also, I'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the ancestral homeland of the people of the clear salt water, the Suquamish, who have lived on the Salish Sea since time immemorial. We honor them and are grateful for their stewardship. Thank you, Paul. You have a lovely exhibit. It's up in the atrium in the Paul Egas, Paul Egas, Pat Egas Gallery. The ledge there, and I invite people to come and see it in person. But I'm grateful for you taking the time to show us today the pictures and talk a little bit about them.
Thank you for the opportunity. So this project is a little different than what I've often done in the past. For years, I was taking pictures of different plants to compile a sort of guide to the native plants of this area. And I have pretty much completed that as much as I want and have it up on Google Photos. And in that time, I was looking, what's representative? What would somebody look at and say, yes, that's definitely the plant that he says it is. But when I had enough of those, I began to want to take pretty pictures that would not necessarily be used for identifying plants. In fact, some of them are downright misleading. The idea was, what would make a nice picture? So I was looking, sort of framing in my mind as I walked along, looking at what I wanted to capture. And it's been a lot of fun, and I've done it several places, but I particularly enjoyed this spring looking at the smaller plants in the Grand Forest. When people think of the Grand Forest, of course, they think of the big trees, and that's hard to photograph. You can see the bottom of the trunks. You can't see much of the top. You can't really capture the forest very easily as a forest, but the forest floor is another matter. So I walked along the trail and looking for individual plants that were grouped in such a way that I thought they might make a nice picture. This is the only shot that is of the forest as such, and it's an unusual one in that it's got this big dead tree on the right, whose branches are drooping down, and their contrasting color made to me an interesting picture. So it's not one you would take to celebrate the Grand Forest as a greenery, but just a dramatic entry into the Grand Forest.
Yeah, it's gorgeous, and I think that the pathway leads us into what we're going to see next.
Exactly. So um, some of what I wanted was Oregon grape. Oregon grape sometimes makes these red branches. And you can see here there's one small one that has a little orange and a little tinge of red, but then these two really bright ones. It's unusual to find more than one red branch that works together. And this was nice because the stem showed up and they give you some lines to travel along. And the two branches are just really vivid. This is one that people walk by all the time, don't even notice. It's called heel all. It's got many different names, but it used to be used for plant medicine. And it grows very close to the ground. You can find it in most gardens and just along the roadside and so on. But what I learned about it early on was you have to get close up if you really want to see what it's about. And it's difficult to capture a patch of it. And this was nice. It made a little triangle that's nicely composed. and everything came out pretty much in focus, so that made me happy. But I want to throw in here another shot, which is not in the exhibit, that shows what a Hilal blossom looks like from the top.
Oh,
And
that's
this has been
gorgeous.
hugely magnified. Yeah, they're really pretty flowers, but they're so tiny that they usually get overlooked. On this one, I was just walking along the trail and I saw this hedge nettle blossom, and it was just being spotlit by a shaft of sunlight coming through the shade. It was shady all around, and this little shaft of sunlight coming down. I thought, wow, that's really striking. And I wanted to include some of the ferns that surrounded it to kind of frame it. In fact, the top fern almost is an arrow pointing at it. It wasn't until I got home and started working with it, I noticed that the shadow had been cast on the leaf uh, underneath the hedge nettle. And I thought, wow, that is really something else.
It really is. That's
That that's a great picture there, Paul.
Yeah, thank you. It's just luck. This is Herb Robert, Stinking Robert, has a lot of different names. It's an invasive species from Europe. It's all over the place, and the both parks and the land trust do what they can to pull it out. It's called Stinking Robert because when you grab it and if you don't have gloves on, your hands are going to stink. But it does make beautiful red leaves when it gets older. And so I was looking for a composition again, and this struck me as having lots of movement in it. And they make the leaves form a kind of arrows that send your eye around within the image. And again, you've got the stems giving it some structure.
I know that you do a lot of work with the land trust and maybe with weed warriors. So you probably had an obligation to pull this out as soon as you took the picture.
Well, this is one that very few people seem to know about. Um, it's called a spotted coral root orchid, and it's the native orchid for Washington State. It's very small. Just, I don't, I would say it's well under a half inch for tall for the blossom. Um, and I knew where I had seen them growing before, and I kept like, my eye out, and I found two patches this year. It was the first time, and more stems than ever. I went back several times trying to photograph it, getting up close enough. And all these pictures are taken with my iPhone, by the way. And iPhone is not very good about taking details of little tiny flowers. It often wants to focus on the background. But I finally got it to take this picture, and I showed it at the club one night, and people liked it, but they said, boy, it's really distracting in the background. So when I got home, I selected the blossoms and the stem and then darkened everything in the background so this could stand out so you can see it. And you can really understand why it's called a spotted coral root because you can see the spots there. And it's just a marvelous plant. And there are just a couple of places that I know of that I've seen them here on the island.
Yeah, just like your first close up, this brings to attention something that we probably just would pass by and not know is right by us.
Yeah. The white here are foam flowers, and you can guess why they're called that. One of the things I like about foam flowers, they bloom in late summer, but they keep the blossoms, or at least the probably technically not the blossoms, but the white outside part stays on them. Oh, I've got one out in front of the house where the little white things are still there. So when all the other wildflowers are gone, you can find them. And of course, um, I've got a bunch of herb Robert in here too, um, and some blackberry leaves. So Both of those are invasive and you wouldn't want to brag about them for use, but they make a really nice background here. So I thought this was very festive. Looks sort of like, I don't know, confetti or something. This yellow blossom, there's several that look sort of like this, but this one is called wall lettuce. I'm not quite sure why. I haven't seen it on a wall, but it's also very difficult to photograph with the phone to get sharp because the phone wants to make the ferns um, what it wants to focus on. But here you can see the top blossoms anyway. It came out pretty clear. I don't know how many pictures I've taken of this plant, and it's the only one I'm happy about. But I like the way that it arches up, and it's almost like a follow the dots kind of maze. And then another of my favorite flowers is the star flowers. They don't bloom for very long, um, and they can be um, colored more or less strongly. I chose some that are really blue here and white, and from a distance they look white. They are again very tiny flowers. These grow quite close to the ground, and they, like I said, they blossom for maybe a week, 2 weeks at most, and they're worth looking for though in mid to late spring.
Beautiful. And I like the interplay of the different plants there, the different leaves. It makes for a nice it makes for a nice what layering or patterning.
Yeah, and again, they make a line. So you've got almost a backwards L shape uh, made by the flowers. Well, I've got zillions of trillium pictures. Of course, everybody takes pictures of trilliums, and there's still signs up in the Grand Forest saying, please don't pick the trilliums. Um, they're interesting for a lot of reasons, but one of the things that happens is as they mature, some, but not all of them, turn pink and sometimes into a deep purple. And this one I liked because it had such strong structure, and you can see the pollen, and the leaves are really strong and pushing out at you, and so it's really almost 3D in its effect. And vanilla leaf, um, what I've read is it had its name because the dried leaves were supposed to smell like vanilla and were used to deodorize rotting corpses when people were sitting around somebody had died.
Okay.
Um, but they have a very interesting way to blossom. The leaves come up, and then these separate shoots with the blossoms on them come up among the leaves, and you'll see they are not attached to the leaf. They have separate stems. So there's just a short period where you see the blossoms, and they were really blossoming like crazy this year. And I liked again the sort of march upward at an angle of these with the leaves around, making a really strong basis for it. And this is another tiny little one. It's called pink purslane. And this one, actually, this is the one that turns pink. So if you look at the blossoms closely, you'll see there's a tiny little stripe of pink, and it's more prominent in some than others. And on the same plant, you'll see some look, you could swear, unless you almost have a magnifying glass, you wouldn't see the pink. And in others, they look almost entirely pink. And I don't know what makes that difference, but it's entertaining. And this batch had just grown up right through the ferns. And this is the kind of thing you would never use for plant ID because it looks like the ferns are blossoming. But again, it's got a sort of a big triangle shape that was satisfactory that goes along with the triangular shape of the ferns.
Right. You have to look closely to see the leaves that are associated with it.
Right. This is one I actually showed before in an earlier exhibit, but I couldn't resist showing it again. Yeah, when I saw it, it made me laugh, and I thought, oh, there is a fern wearing a shawl. Uh, and this moss had just fallen down on this one fern frond. And so I was imagining it as a wealthy lady with her elaborate shawl on.
It's a bridge.
Yeah, that's a great picture.
And this is the last one. Bleeding heart. Everybody knows the bleeding hearts, and they do grow quite prolifically. One of the things that is nice about the Grand Forest, if you want to see bleeding hearts, the biggest congregation of them is right at the entrance, just right off the parking lot. You don't have to walk very far before you see a lot of bleeding hearts, and they last for quite a long time. This is the wild bleeding hearts. Cultivated ones are darker in color, and these don't look like they're bleeding. They're pink, but they're hard to photograph to get an interesting composition. It's pretty much just the same pattern. And so I like this one up against this mossy trunk because it gave it a background. The spider web up at upper left, I'm not sure whether I love that or not, but I left it in. It makes kind of a ceiling indicator, I guess. So that's it.
Yes, and I like the contrast of the textures again there. In fact, I think that's one of the things about these photos, in addition to just looking at things that you might overlook, getting a close-up look at these structure of these plants, is the idea of the tapestry of the forest floor.
Yeah. So thank you for letting me share these.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Yeah. Thanks, Paul. Now, you took most of these in the spring, you said? Or
Yeah,
'cause-
these were all done in mid to late spring.
okay, because one of the first ones with the red, I thought maybe that was just something that changes with the season, but obviously it was
Oh,
early in
that.
the season.
Yeah, that Oregon grape.
Oh, they're
Yeah, the Oregon
grape.
grape. Yeah, yeah,
That might have been early spring.
yeah.
A
Anyway,
leftover
nice.
maybe. Anyway, yes, it was nice to see the variety there. And all this month they're up at the Senior and Community Center in the hallway. So you can come and take a close-up look yourself for most of these.
Mm,
Not all, right? You added one photo.
mm.
Right.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate you dropping by, and I appreciate the engagement of the photo club, sharing your photos with not only each other, but with the wider community. It's a gift for all of us.